like to introduce you to Sydney housewife Yvonne Gladys Butler and her lovely, rugged husband, Desmond. Yvonne planned the perfect murder. She didn't arrange an alibi because she wouldn't need one. In fact, she was so confident of getting away with it, she left the victim's body out in plain sight and didn't bother to hide it. Yvonne believed that the perfect murder was possible if you made it look like something else entirely. Her recipe for murder was simple. In her small kitchen at 57 Ferndale Street, just off Edgware Road, she waited for the kettle to boil. She carefully measured from 2 glass bottles, one labelled Bonox and the other Thorat. Although both products were described as economical and easy to use, only one was marked poison. She tapped a small amount from each into a porcelain teacup. She poured boiling water over the mixture and stirred. Her plan was in motion. She watched the swirling vortex of liquid and paused to ensure that the mixture had dissolved. She leaned over it and curls of steam spiraled slowly and ominously from the cup. The flame-shaped clouds of water vapour touched her nose. Satisfied that the hot brew looked and smelt like a cup of regular beef tea, she picked it up and she walked down the hall and went upstairs to the bedroom, flicking off the hallway light as she passed. The entire house fell into darkness, and she handed the hot beef tea to her husband, Desmond, who was propped up in bed reading the newspaper by lamplight. "Your Bonox, dear." Desmond woke early the next morning, feeling sick, though not sick enough to warrant medical attention. He had diarrhea and a stomach upset and a headache and nausea. That night, Yvonne again reached for those 2 small bottles with the strange sounding names, and the following day, Desmond felt worse. He had to take days off from his job as a cleaner at Grace Brothers department store. He felt exhausted. He had aches and pains and stiffness in his legs. The doctor prescribed bed rest for Desmond and, surprisingly, more Bonox beef tea. Yvonne was very happy. Doctors recommended Bonox at the time for all sorts of ailments. Because it was pre-digested beef, it was gentle on the stomach and could be dissolved quickly in hot water. It was also high in iron. Yvonne followed the doctor's orders, of course she did. She made beef tea for Desmond every night and every lunchtime too, and every night she put a little extra poison in. But what is the backstory to all this? Why did this lovely, smiling lady start her dastardly plan? Well, it started because Desmond was a big old flirt. He was very tall and athletic with a cleft chin, deep-set eyes and a mop of jet black hair. And he did not hide the pleasure he took in flirting with women, not even from his wife. Yvonne said, "He's not the cranky type, but he can't seem to talk to a woman without pawing her. He's a real tiger." Yvonne wanted out. And she had started to dig her way out of this marriage, bollocks aside. She had started a relationship with a much older man in Glee, a retired firefighter called Herbert Wood. One night, Desmond followed Yvonne. He followed her up King Street, up Missenden Road and into Glee to the door of Herbert Wood's home. He waited for her to go in and then waited a little longer before he finally knocked on the front door. Wood opened the door to a man with a look of absolute thunder on his face. Desmond simply said, "You'll see what she's like." And he turned on his heel and left. Desmond had begun to go out and play cards with the boys, and he also went to the dance hall on the City Road near the university on a Friday night. A couple of weeks after Yvonne had started her sadistic plan, Desmond had his first full medical episode. He was at the dance hall on the crowded dance floor, throwing his moves. Kicking his legs wildly, he began to feel sharp pains and pins and needles in his feet, and that prickly sensation quickly spread up his legs. The dancers around him jerked and hopped and spun. The Lindy Hop was all the rage, and Desmond struggled to maintain control of the lower half of his body. His knees buckled and he dropped to the floor. People assumed he was drunk, and they let him be. Still lying on the floor, Desmond's body was limp. He couldn't control his legs. With a man under each arm bearing his weight, he was lifted from the dance floor and dragged towards the front door with a definite lean. Desmond rallied a little as he was shuffled through the crowd. But then, clearly in great pain, he started loudly wailing, "I feel like I'm on fire!" Embarrassed by the man's hysteria, Desmond's rescuers, his friends, moved even more quickly to get him outside. To their dismay, Desmond's vocal distress did not subside. His voice remained panicky. He threw one hand across his face dramatically, shielding his eyes from the glare of the flood lamps mounted outside the venue. His friends dragged him away from the hall over the road. They popped him up at the base of a large tree, a short distance away, and considered how to get him home. They went to look for a cab, and they hailed a cab for him. And by the time a cab arrived, Desmond was now staring vacantly into space at the spot where he sat. Desmond winced with every twist and turn the cab made on the road home in agony. It was around midnight when the cab turned off King Street into Edgware Road and into Ferndale Avenue. The lights were off. It seemed that Yvonne was not home. Over the weeks after the dance, Desmond's condition worsened. In addition to the pins and needles in his feet, he now had excruciating pain travelling up his legs daily. He had trouble keeping food down and his stomach was on fire. The doctors came and went, but none seemed to offer a formal diagnosis. One doctor said it seemed something mental in origin, typical of someone having a nervous breakdown. Over the following weeks, Desmond could barely even drink his Bonnox tea. He spent whole days in bed, unable to work. Yvonne sat with him, lighting cigarettes for him, and he chain smoked to not feel quite so sick. One night, Yvonne came to the door of the neighbour's house and said that Desmond was really sick. "He won't stop crying, I can't stop him. He's out of his mind," she cried to the neighbours. Rushing to the house, they heard his screams from outside. They lifted him up out of bed and, flagging a cab, took him to the hospital, the Royal Prince Alfred in Camperdown. But he was quickly released when the doctors could make no diagnosis of a physical ailment. Upon his return home, Desmond stayed in bed for weeks and lay as if dead, his screams at night carrying out across the neighbourhood. No doctor understood what was going on with him. A few weeks later, Desmond's friends and neighbours had had enough. Action had to occur. They bundled him into a cab and took him to the medical precinct at Macquarie Street in the city. At the Sydney hospital, Desmond's friend pulled out the only ace up his sleeve he had. He took a doctor aside and whispered to him that Desmond had been threatening suicide. He knew that the threat of suicide would be taken seriously, as at that time it was a criminal act. So then, rather than being limited to hospital stays, he'd be taken to the Darlinghurst Reception Centre to be assessed, and from there on to Callan Park Hospital for the insane at Rozelle. Desmond ended up on the psychiatric ward at Broughton Hall at the Callan Park Hospital for the insane, being treated alongside returned servicemen from the World Wars who had neurological conditions, or shell shock as it was known. Desmond ended up receiving electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Not just one treatment, but many. After a few weeks and many treatments, Desmond began to improve. The doctors attributed his improvement entirely to their use of electroconvulsive therapy. But in reality, it was just not having access to his regular cup of Bonox tea. 6 months later, he was released back into the careful, loving care of his wife, Yvonne. So what happened? Well, it didn't end well for Desmond. Back on the Bonox, a few weeks later, Desmond found himself back at Callan Park, where unfortunately he died less than a year after this campaign of poisoning started in July 1948. Free of her bounds of her troubled marriage, Yvonne sought the affections of a new man, Bertram Fletcher, so clearly the fireman didn't work out. She believed his loving words and married him. But after a few years of living together, his ways became abusive. And Yvonne resorted to what she knew. After a new burst of treatment with Bonox tea with special additives, Bertram passed away in March 1952. And at this time, Bertram's death did not go unquestioned by police authorities. This is an actual press clipping from the time. An autopsy was performed on Bertram's body and high doses of thallium rat poisoning were found. And this prompted police to exhume Desmond's body to find the same thing. In June 1952, Yvonne was charged with the murder of both men and stood trial. She was found guilty by a jury in September that year. In an ironic twist of fate, the newspapers actually caught up with Yvonne a couple of years later. They were asking her about, her life at Long Bay Jail, where she was now incarcerated. And she revealed she was now the head chef. Bonox tea, anyone?